The Renaissance was a cultural movement that spanned roughly the 14th to the 17th century, beginning in Italy in the late Middle Ages and later spreading to the rest of Europe. It encompassed a flowering of literature, science, art, religion and politics, and a resurgence of learning based on classical sources, the development of linear perspective in painting, and a gradual but widespread educational reform. Traditionally, this intellectual transformation has resulted in the Renaissance being viewed as a bridge between the Middle Ages and the modern era. It is perhaps best known for its artistic developments and the contributions of such polymaths as Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, who inspired the term Renaissance man. Florence is the capital city of the Italian region of Tuscany and of the province of Florence. It is the most populous city in Tuscany with approximately 370,000 inhabitants, expanding to over 1.5 million in the metropolitan area. Located on the banks of the River Arno, Florence is famous for its history and especially its importance in the Middle Ages and during the Renaissance, its art and architecture, and more generally, for its cultural heritage. A centre of medieval European trade and finance, and one of the wealthiest cities of the time, Florence is considered the birthplace of the Renaissance and has been called the Athens of the Middle Ages. A turbulent political history includes periods of rule by the powerful Medici family and numerous religious and republican revolutions. From 1865 to 1870, the city was also the capital of the recently established Kingdom of Italy. The historic centre of Florence attracts millions of tourists each year. It was declared a World Heritage Site in 1982. Due to Florence's artistic and architectural heritage, it has been ranked by Forbes as one of the most beautiful cities in the world, and the city is noted for its history and culture, Renaissance art and architecture and monuments. The city also contains numerous museums and art galleries and still exerts an influence in the fields of art, culture and politics. Leonardo da Vinci was an Italian Renaissance polymath, painter, sculptor, architect, musician, scientist, mathematician, engineer, inventor, anatomist, geologist, cartographer, botanist and writer, whose genius, perhaps more than that of any other figure, epitomised the Renaissance humanist ideal. Leonardo has often been described as the archetype of the Renaissance man. Leonardo da Vinci was born on April 15, 1452, in Vinci, Italy. It is uncertain that Vinci, just west of Florence, was the actual birthplace, and it is often debated that perhaps he was born in a farmhouse in Anciano. Nevertheless, Vinci claims the prestigious title of the birthplace of Leonardo da Vinci. Little is known of da Vinci's early life. What is known is that he was the illegitimate son of Sir Piero da Vinci and a woman who is only known by her first name, Caterina. It is speculated that she was possibly a slave from the Middle East, or perhaps just a lowly servant that worked in the household. His father, a notary of some stature, did not raise the boy in the early years. Instead, Leonardo lived with his grandfather in 1457, as ascertained from tax records of the period. Shortly thereafter, he went to live with his father or his father's younger brother, Francesco. The educational prospects for Leonardo were very limited because of the circumstances of his birth. His early training was probably conducted by his stepmother, Donna Albira. Most of his early education was self-taught. When his father noted his artistic talent, he was whisked away to Florence to apprentice with Andrea del Verrocchio at around the age of 16 or 17. Under del Verrocchio's tutorage, Leonardo studied painting and sculpture. He probably learned geometry during his apprenticeship and worked with other students and artists of the time, such as Sandro Botticelli, Cosimo Rosoli, and Lorenzo de Credi. It was during this time that he was assigned his first task of painting the angel in baptism of Christ. After seeing Leonardo's angel, it is said that Verrocchio swore to never pick up a paintbrush again. At the age of about 20, Leonardo's apprenticeship with Verrocchio came to an end. In 1472, he joined the Artists' Guild Compagnia di San Luca. During his first Florentine period, Leonardo probably received some of his first commissions. He became known for his artistic talents with his work on Madonna and Child, Small Annunciation, and Adoration of the Magi. In 1478, Leonardo left Florence for the first time and travelled to Milan. There he joined a new patron, whom he probably met while still in Florence, Ludovico Forza. Initially, Leonardo was to have been a military engineer, but instead became the court artist. He had designed several machines, such as catapults and armoured cars, but none of these machines were ever built. It was during this period that the bronze horse was commissioned and started. However, as with many of his projects, it was never finished. Leonardo's drawing of the Vitruvian Man is also regarded as a cultural icon, being reproduced on items as varied as the euro, textbooks and t-shirts. Perhaps 15 of his paintings survive, the small number because of his constant and frequently disastrous experimentation with new techniques and his chronic procrastination. Nevertheless, these few works, together with his notebooks, which contain drawings, scientific diagrams, and his thoughts on the nature of the painting, compose a contribution to later generations of artists, only rivaled by that of his contemporary Michelangelo. It has been written that Leonardo may be the most universally recognised left-handed artist of all time, a fact documented by numerous Renaissance authors and manifested conspicuously in his drawing and handwriting. In his notebooks, he wrote a mirror image because of his left-handedness. It was easier for him, and he was falsely accused of trying to protect his work. Early Italian connoisseurs were divided as to whether Leonardo also drew with his right hand. More recently, Anglo-American art historians have for the most part discounted suggestions of ambidexterity. Leonardo was and is renowned primarily as a painter. He painted one of the most famous frescoes, The Last Supper. The work was not actually a fresco in the true sense of the word, but was paramount in establishing him as a portraitist and artist. Among his works, the Mona Lisa is the most famous and the most parodied portrait, and The Last Supper the most reproduced religious painting of all time, with their fame approached only by Michelangelo's Creation of Adam.
In this painting, there are no signs of a brushstroke anywhere on the painting. That includes the very fine details of the embroidery on the dress, the hair. This is the je ne sais quoi of Leonardo, the genius. We don't know how he applied it.
In late 1499, Leonardo left Milan and returned to Florence, where he accepted a commission for an altar painting for the friars of the Order of the Servites. It was for this painting that Leonardo created one of his unfinished masterpieces, the Burlington House cartoon. It was also during this second Florentine period that he started two of his most famous works of art, the Battle of Anghiari and the Mona Lisa. The Battle of Anghiari was never finished, and the Mona Lisa was never delivered to the client, Francesco del Giocondo. In 1506 he headed back to Milan, and it appears that during the 6 years he remained there, he continued his anatomy studies. He also revived his plans for a grand equestrian statue for Glen Giacomo Trivulzio. Again, the statue remained unfinished. Thereafter, Leonardo moved to Rome, where he continued his experiments with flight, optical puzzles, as well as botany and the scientific mixing of oil paints and varnishes. 5 years later, Leonardo joined the then King of France, Francois I, in the Loire Valley. The aging artist was sickly and suffering the results of a stroke. Unable to paint any longer, he undertook several projects, including a mechanical lion that was able to walk a few steps. On May 2, 1519, Leonardo died and was buried in St. Florentine in Amboise. Yet even in death, the artist's travels were not ended. During the wars of religion, Leonardo's remains were moved several times. Eventually, he was buried in the chapel of St. Hubert in the castle of Amboise. Leonardo da Vinci did not believe in life after death, and he did not agree with the teachings of the Church. He was generous but suspicious. He spent 30 years keeping meticulous records and journals documenting his experiments and designs. Vasari observes with reference to Leonardo's writings. He wrote backwards in rude characters and with the left hand, so that anyone who is not practiced in reading them cannot understand them. He did not number the 5,000 pages he documented, but was adamant that each observation or experiment documented be completed on the page it was begun. Leonardo took great pains to finish his notebooks, yet in contrast to his scientific studies, this artist, who epitomizes the Renaissance, left much of his artistic endeavors unfinished. Much of Leonardo's life is a mystery in spite of his writings. Little is known of the man inside the body because he did not reveal much to the world. His accomplishments throughout his short 67 years on Earth did much to revolutionize the artistic community, and had his machines been built then, would have revolutionized society centuries in advance. Truly, he was a man before his time. Michelangelo was an Italian artist famous for his sculptures, paintings, poems, and even his architecture. He was also largely responsible for the development of the Mannerism movement and was a participating founder of the High Renaissance. His talent was discovered at a young age when he was brought into Lorenzo de' Medici's School of Art and the Medici home. Here he was raised among artistic masterpieces as well as revolutionary intellectual theories. He grew to become one of the greatest artists of all time, and still today his name is recognized throughout the world as a creator of masterpieces. Michelangelo's influence in various forms of Western art is tremendous. Although Michelangelo created amazing paintings, one of the most famous being the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and one of the most controversial being the Last Judgment, he above all viewed himself as a sculptor, creating the famous figure of David poised before the confrontation with the giant Goliath. There was not an Italian sculptor of the 16th century who was not influenced by the works of Michelangelo. In his later life, Michelangelo became more involved with poetry and architecture, helping to design the St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Unlike many other artists of his time, he enjoyed much popularity during his life, working for the Medici family as well as popes. As an artist, he was unmatched, the creator of works of sublime beauty that expresses the full breadth of the human condition. Yet in a world where art flourished only with patronage, Michelangelo was caught between the conflicting powers and whims of the Medici family in Florence and the papacy in Rome. Born on Sunday, March 6, 1475, Michelangelo spent his early years in the Italian village of Caprese, a child destined to be shaped by the men in his life. His mother, Francesca Neri, inattentive and in failing health, entrusted the care of Michelangelo to the wife of a stonecutter in a town near Florence. From that moment, history has no account of her further involvement in Michelangelo's childhood or later life. His father, a minor Florentine official of noble lineage, was consumed with keeping what little remained of the family, money and properties. Michelangelo endured a childhood lacking in affection. His mother died when he was only 6 years old, and Michelangelo's father, recognizing the boy's intellectual potential, enrolled him in the school of a master linguist to prepare young Michelangelo for a career in business. It was here, as he studied Latin, that Michelangelo met a student of painter Domenico Ghirlandaio and decided to follow his artistic desires by agreeing to apprentice in the painter's workshop. This life-altering decision, made by a shy and ill-tempered 13-year-old Michelangelo, shocked and infuriated his father, who had hoped that his son would become a respected merchant and preserve the family's tenuous position in Florentine society. In the early days of the Italian Renaissance, there was a stigma associated with the practice of art because it entailed manual labour. Michelangelo's decision to defy his father and risk his family's social standing created a distance between the two men that would haunt the artist throughout his life. Within this conflict is found an understanding of Michelangelo the artist and, more importantly, the man. Despite his intellectual and artistic accomplishments, Michelangelo led a life punctuated by intense conflict. Soon after joining Ghirlandaio to learn the art of fresco painting, Michelangelo left his apprenticeship to study sculpture and anatomy at the school in the Medici Gardens. His early success there won him an invitation to the home of Lorenzo de' Medici, the Magnificent, and more importantly exposed him to noted humanists, scientists and poets who were regulars at the Medici court. Though their radical beliefs were often at odds with the artist's strong religious faith, these men of the Renaissance intrigued the young Michelangelo. Their impact is apparent even in his earliest works.
He's a painter, he's a sculptor, he's an architect. All of those activities are linked together by drawing because he prepares everything on paper before he begins to work. And that's what we see here. We see with these 90 drawings him working meticulously to prepare all of his works.
With the death of Lorenzo in 1492, the school broke up, and Michelangelo was given permission to study anatomy at the hospital attached to Sto Spirito. By June 1496, he was in Rome, and here established his reputation with two marble statues, the Drunken Bacchus for a private patron and the Pieta for St. Peter's. The latter is generally considered to be the masterpiece of his early years, deeply poignant, exquisitely beautiful, and more highly finished than his later works were to be. Michelangelo returned to Florence a famous sculptor and was awarded the commission for the colossal figure of David. Soon after this, he was commissioned to paint a battle scene for the new council chamber of the Palazzo. On one wall he commenced the painting of the Battle of Cassina, while on the opposite wall his principal rival, Leonardo, was commissioned to paint the Battle of Anghiari. Although neither painting was ever finished, copies of a fragment of Michelangelo's full-size cartoon showing a group of nude soldiers reacting variously to the battle alarm that has interrupted their bathing soon began to circulate. These nudes, posed in a variety of turning and animated poses, established the Mannerist conception of the male nude as the principal vehicle for the expression of human emotions. Michelangelo abandoned this Florentine commission when Pope Julius II summoned him to Rome to design his tomb. What should have been the most prestigious commission of his career, a freestanding tomb with some 40 figures to be located in St. Peter's, became, in Michelangelo's own words, the tragedy of the tomb. Julius died in 1513. The contract was redrawn several times over the following years, with ever-diminishing funding. Other demands were made on Michelangelo by successive popes, and the project was finally cobbled together in 1545, a shadow of its original conception, with much help from assistants. The tomb is now principally famous for the colossal figure of Moses, one of Michelangelo's greatest sculptures. Two slave figures, the dying slave and the rebellious slave, intended for the largest of the schemes for the tomb, are now in the Louvre in Paris. While in the early stages of work on the tomb, Julius also commissioned Michelangelo to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo was evidently reluctant to abandon his sculptural project for one of painting, but he nonetheless began work in 1508, completed the first half by 1510 and the whole ceiling by 1512. Dissatisfied with traditional methods of fresco painting and mistrustful of assistants who could not meet his evolving demands, He dismissed his workshop at an early stage and completed the monumental task almost single-handedly. In the year of his death, his 89th year, he was working on yet another Pietà, the Ronaldini Pietà. In 1546, Michelangelo was appointed chief architect to St. Peter's and charged with the completion of the new church, the most prestigious architectural commission in Christendom. Michelangelo's drawings offer a unique insight into how the artist worked and thought. They are beautiful artworks in their own right, but also provide a crucial link between his work as a sculptor, painter, and architect. His primary focus as an artist was the male body, and his drawings chart his relentless search to find poses that would most eloquently express the emotional and spiritual state of his subjects. Most of Michelangelo's drawings were never intended for public display. He destroyed a large number before he died, probably to prevent them from falling into other hands. He may also have wished to conceal the amount of preparation behind his major works. David is a masterpiece of Renaissance sculpture created between 1501 and 1504 by Michelangelo. It is a 5.17-metre marble statue of a standing male nude. The statue represents the biblical hero David, a favoured subject in the art of Florence. Originally commissioned as one of a series of statues of prophets to be positioned along the roofline of the east end of the Florence Cathedral, the statue was instead placed in a public square. The statue was moved to the Accademia Gallery in Florence in 1873 and later replaced at the original location by a replica. The tomb of Michelangelo can be found in the Santa Croce Church in Florence, Italy. The three figures sitting on the tomb represent painting, sculpture, and architecture. Man is a fortunate species. Over thousands of years, our intelligence has given us tools and technology, art and science, society and civilization. We now possess a treasure house of man's great achievements.